In 2017, the Community Foundation of the Fox River Valley produced this video to tell the story of the early history of St. Charles, Illinois. This video also is a tribute to the many residents of the city who have promoted philanthropy through our organization. Due to its length, the video is divided into 5 sections for the convenience of the viewer. These sections are a country town, building a city, the Gates-Baker-Norris era, education, and leisure, recreation, and parks. And now, the story of St. Charles, Illinois, Part 4, Education, 1835 to 2003. Education has always been important to the citizens of St. Charles. As early as 1835, the process of providing structure to the educational system was begun when 23-year-old Prudence Ward was chosen to be the first schoolteacher for the town. Prudence was the daughter of pioneers Calvin and Abigail Ward, who moved to the Fox Valley area from Massachusetts in 1835. Calvin Ward partnered with early pioneers Ira Menard and Reed Fierson to help establish the new town. Prudence taught school in Warren Tyler's log home, a mile east of the river on the north side of East Main Street, west of Tyler Road. The following year, she left her career behind when she married Dean Fierson, Reed's brother. The couple farmed on land they owned on what is now Dean Street, between 7th Street and Randall Road. The year Prudence left teaching, a small schoolhouse was built on East Main Street between North 2nd and 3rd Avenues. Within a few years, a new school was constructed on the northeast corner of Cedar and 4th Avenues. Later, this building became a private home. In the 1840s and early 1850s, private schools were formed and classes were held in the town's commercial buildings and at local churches, such as the Methodist Episcopal Church. Shortly after the establishment of the Illinois public school system, one of the first public schools was constructed in St. Charles. It was named the Westside School and was located on the corner of Illinois and 5th Street. In 1856, the Eastside School was built on the corner of Illinois and 6th Avenue, where Lincoln School was later constructed. These first public schools in the town were administered under the direction of 2 individual school districts, District 7 and District 8. The division was keenly felt and had the effect of creating 2 separate towns. Gratefully, consolidation came in 1897, when Charles Haynes donated his family's homestead on East Main Street for the construction of a school for the higher grade levels that would serve both sides of the river. Even though there were objections to such an arrangement by those who lived on the west side, the school was finally constructed in 1899 on East Main Street, and Districts 7 and 8 merged into one district, District 87. The school was named for Charles Haynes and was designated for the education of both junior and senior high students. As the town grew, more elementary schools were needed. In 1911, the Evan Shelby School was constructed on 5th Street, next to the Westside School. It was named after the first settler in St. Charles. 3 years later, the school district suffered a significant loss when their greatest benefactor, Charles Haynes, died in 1914. Haynes was born in 1844 in St. Charles. He lived the majority of his life on West Main Street. He inherited his wealth from his father, Robert J. Haynes, who bought the Millington Mill, which stood on the site of the future Baker Hotel. Robert Haynes operated the business under the name Excelsior Mills and became one of the wealthiest citizens in town. The inheritance, which Charles received, enabled him to buy the building on the corner of 2nd Street and Main, called the Haynes Block, where the Colson's department store was eventually located. Being civic-minded, Haynes served as the mayor of St. Charles from 1889 to 1891, and as president of the Board of Education of District 87 from its formation in 1897 until his death in 1914. Since he was unmarried and had no descendants, his estate was divided among several charities. He left the St. Charles schools a $100,000 trust fund for the future cost of educational materials and also land on the west side of town, on which 2 future schools were built. After Haynes' death in 1914, St. Charles philanthropist Colonel Edward J. Baker stepped in to help the schools. In 1919, he encouraged George E. Thompson, a former principal of Haynes School, to become the superintendent of the district. Thompson accepted the offer and remained in the position for 39 years. During Thompson's tenure, there were many changes in the district. By 1926, Haynes School, which served junior and senior high students, was filled to capacity. As a result, a new high school, called St. Charles High School, was opened that year on West Main and 7th Street, on land gifted to the district by Charles Haynes. In the process, High School District 150 was formed, and the old Haynes School was designated solely for junior high students. In 1928, the Eastside School was destroyed by fire and was replaced by the Abraham Lincoln Elementary School. And then the Westside School was torn down in 1930. In 1949, the residents voted to consolidate High School District 150 and Elementary School District 87 into District 303. Little Woods, an area northeast of town, was included in the new district. Older students were bused to the St. Charles Junior and Senior High Schools, and the Littlewood School served as an elementary school. It was closed in 2000. Students living in that area were transferred to Anderson Elementary School. Also, the residents of Wasco, a community west of St. Charles, voted to become a part of the new district in 1949. The Wasco School served students through grade 6, and the junior and senior high school students were bused to St. Charles. In the early 1950s, the stately Haynes School building was deteriorating, and the junior high students attending that school were transferred to the high school. In 1956, Haynes School was sold at auction, and a year later was torn down to make way for a grocery store. Also in 1956, 3 new elementary schools were dedicated. Similar in design, they were built to house the growing elementary school population. The Alice Davis School, located on South 7th Street, was named after a longtime educator in the St. Charles schools. Miss Davis was in the 2nd graduating class of the old Charles Haynes School. She served as both teacher and principal of Haynes, and later taught junior high students who had transferred to the new high school in the early 1950s. Her teaching career spanned 4 decades. The Amelia Anderson School, located on Villa Marie Road, was named after the district's first school nurse. Miss Anderson made daily rounds of the city and country schools. An extraordinarily dedicated professional, she often transported sick children from school to home and would stay by their side throughout the night to monitor their well-being. The Harriet Richmond School, located on South 12th Street, was named after a long-serving school principal in St. Charles. Miss Richmond was the granddaughter of St. Charles pioneers, Clarinda and Reed Fierson. She taught for 34 years in the St. Charles and Elgin schools, and was the principal of the old East Side School and Lincoln School. Her brother, Ralph Richmond, was mayor of St. Charles from 1957 to 1961. In 1958, Superintendent George Thompson retired. In appreciation for his many years of devoted service, the high school was named in his honor. The following year, a fourth elementary school was dedicated on South 13th Avenue in honor of two St. Charles teachers, Helen Munhall and May Munhall Driscoll. Helen Munhall began her 44-year teaching career in 1917 at the old Haynes School. In the early 1950s, she transferred to the high school, where she became principal of the junior high division. She retired in 1961. May Munhall Driscoll taught at the Westside School and the old Haynes School. After serving as principal of Lincoln School for 14 years, she became the first principal of the Munhall School. Mrs. Driscoll was the first woman who was allowed to teach in St. Charles after she married. When her husband became ill after serving in World War I, the American Legion convinced the school board to break with its discriminatory policy and allow her to return to teaching. For the record, this policy was standard among all local school districts. In 1959, the first section of a new junior high, named the Charles Haynes Junior High, was opened on South 9th Street for 7th grade students. The second section was opened in 1962 for 8th graders, and 9th graders were moved into the school in 1964. Now referred to as a middle school, the school is located on land bequeathed to the district by Charles Haynes. In 1966, the Wild Rose Elementary School opened on Red Haw Lane, east of Randall Road. The land, once owned by the pioneer Fierson family, had been converted into the Wild Rose subdivision in the late 1950s. As the population continued to grow and spread into outlying areas, the need for another junior high became apparent. St. Charles benefactors Lester and Delora Norris donated farmland on Dunham Road north of East Main, and the new Dunham Junior High School opened on the site in 1973. When a new St. Charles High School was built in 1977 on the Dunham Road campus, Dunham Junior High became a wing of the new high school and was no longer designated as a separate junior high. The 1926 high school then became a junior high and retained the name of George E. Thompson. Later, its name was changed to George E. Thompson Middle School. Fierson Creek Elementary School opened in 1989 on Bolcombe Road and was named for the creek located near the school. The creek and the school pay tribute to the Fierson family, who were pioneers of St. Charles. Fox Ridge Elementary School also opened in 1989. The school is located on Tyler Road. The name of the school was chosen by the elementary students in St. Charles. In 1995, a new north building was added to the high school campus on Dunham Road. It later was renamed the Redling Middle School in honor of John Redling. Ling was a graduate of West Aurora High School and Aurora College. He then moved to West Virginia, where he worked for the Boy Scouts of America. After serving in the Army Air Corps during World War II, he returned to his position with the Boy Scouts. He then became a teacher, and later assistant and interim superintendent for the West Aurora schools. He also worked for the county superintendent's office. In 1958, he was hired to become the superintendent of the St. Charles schools, where he remained until his retirement in 1972. As the city continued to grow, a second high school was opened for the 2000-2001 school year. It was built on Redgate Road and named St. Charles North. After the St. Charles North High School was opened, the high school on Dunham Road was renamed St. Charles East High School. In 2000, the Bell Graham Elementary School opened on Fox Mill Boulevard. It was named for Charles Bell, Kenneth Graham, and Robert Graham, who each retired in 2000 after serving the district for more than 30 years. In 1967, Charles Bell began his career at Wasco Elementary School, where he taught for 5 years. He then was an administrator for the St. Charles schools for 14 years. He also was principal at Richmond, and later Munhall Elementary Schools, before retiring in 2000. Mr. Bell served the district for a total of 33 years. Kenneth Graham taught for the district from 1966 to 1976. He then spent the next 24 years as principal at Richmond and Davis Elementary Schools. He retired in 2000 after serving the district for 34 years. Robert Graham taught at Munhall School from 1966 to 1969. He then was principal at Wasco Elementary School for 20 years and Fierson Creek School for 1 year. He also was the district's assistant superintendent for personnel for 10 years. He retired in 2000 after 34 years of service to the district. In 2003, Corrin Elementary School was opened on Thornwood Way in South Elgin. The school was named for Robert Corrin, a pioneer from Virginia who settled in the Fox Valley area in the 1830s. Corrin was only 19 years old when he laid claim to land in the northeastern part of Campton Township, establishing the Corrin Farm. Today, the Corrin Farm Preservation Society provides opportunities for people of all ages to learn about the history of farm life in the township. Norton Creek Elementary School was opened in 2003 on Smith Road in West Chicago. The school was named for a waterway near the school. Both Norton Creek and Corrin Elementary Schools were built to serve children living in the new subdivisions, which were developed when the farms in those areas were sold. In the early years, the children living on or near these farms were bused to other St. Charles schools. Throughout its history, St. Charles also was home to several parochial schools. Most notable was the beautiful Mount St. Mary Academy, located between 2nd Street and Route 31. The academy was established by the Dominican Sisters in 1907. The mansion on the property was used for classrooms. It was built by Congressman John Farnsworth, who formed the 8th Illinois Cavalry in St. Charles during the Civil War. Initially, the school served boys and girls from kindergarten through high school. Later, it became an all-girls high school for day and resident students. Mount St. Mary's was considered an exclusive educational institution with high academic standards. It also provided sports opportunities through its tennis courts and small golf course. Ever mindful of safety, the Dominican sisters built a tunnel called St. Jude's Passageway that led students under Route 31 to the park and river across the road. Sadly, the school was closed in 1972 due to financial difficulties and a shortage of sisters in the teaching profession. That year, the Lutheran High School Association of Greater Chicago purchased the site for a coeducational high school called the Fox Valley Lutheran Academy. Again, due to financial problems, this school closed in the early 1990s, and the buildings on the site were torn down for the development of upscale housing. Meanwhile, the public schools in St. Charles expanded as the population increased. And students continued to receive outstanding educations as evidenced by their academic achievements and graduation rates. Since the founding of their city, the residents of St. Charles have taken education seriously and have given generously to secure its future. It is clear that their efforts have been rewarded many times throughout the years, because the strong and vibrant schools of St. Charles have resulted in a strong and vibrant community.